If you're watching this video, you've probably heard of the Dyatlov Pass tragedy, where 9 hikers unexpectedly perished in the Russian Ural Mountains. I'm not going to go into much detail about this tragedy as it's already been discussed so often, but there is another, less well-known case that is eerily similar to this one, and it happened decades later. 6 hikers began bleeding from their eyes, foaming out the mouth, and bashing their own heads against rocks on their descent down a mountain, and no one knows why. "41-year-old Lyudmila Korovina was a skilled survivalist and hiking instructor. Although she was known for pushing her students quite hard, her students said she was a terrific teacher who instilled confidence in them and taught them essential hiking skills. In the summer of 1993, Korovina planned a hiking trip with 6 of her students to the Khamar-Daban Mountains. The Khamar-Daban Mountains is a mountain range located in southern Siberia, Russia, with an elevation of 7,861 feet. Korovina was well knowledgeable about the region. It was a well-liked tourist destination and was seen as a very safe location to hike, particularly in the summer. Korovina was joined by 6 of her students: Alexander Kryzin, Tatiana Filipenko, Denis Shvachkin, Valentina Utochenko, Victoria Zalesova, and Timur Bapanov. The group of 7 hikers arrived in Irkutsk by train in August 1993. Korovina's hiking group was one of 3 in the area, one of which was being led by her daughter, Natalia. Starting on August 2nd, 1993, the first 2 days of the hike turned out better than expected. But as they were beginning their descent on August 4th, they were hit with an unexpected rainstorm. The hikers were slowed down by the extra weight of their wet supplies and decided to make a camp. Even though there was nearby tree cover, Korovina decided to set up camp in an exposed area due to the hikers' exhaustion. The group failed to start a fire that night, but managed to successfully build a fire the next morning on August 5th. They ate breakfast and continued on their descent. This is where things began to take a turn for the worst. While descending down the mountain, Alexander, who was at the back of the group, started screaming. He was bleeding from his eyes and ears and was frothing at the mouth. He fell to the ground convulsing and then went still. Korovina ran up to him, trying to get him to gain consciousness. A moment later, she cried out, experiencing the same symptoms. She convulsed and then collapsed on top of Alexander. Tatiana, who had gotten to Korovina first, was the next to collapse, grabbing at her throat as though she couldn't breathe. She crawled over to a nearby rock and bashed her head against it until she went limp. Victoria and Timur started to run. While running, they collapsed and died, throwing up blood and clawing at their own throats, tearing their clothes off. Valentina and Denis hurried away, but shortly after, Denis also collapsed, convulsing. Valentina ran down the mountain, set up a tent for the night under a tree cover, and fell asleep. On the next day, she returned to the site of the dead bodies to retrieve supplies she needed. For 4 days, she followed power lines down the mountain in hopes that someone would find her. She found a river and started following it. On August 9th, she was found by a group of Ukrainian kayakers who took her to the nearest police station where a report was filed. Valentina didn't speak for several days, and because Valentina had not been able to recount her version of events yet, it took 2 days to find the bodies using helicopters. All of the dead hikers were found to have signs of bruised lungs. An autopsy concluded that Alexander, Tatiana, Timur, Victoria, and Denis died of hypothermia, and Korovina had a heart attack. Protein deficiency due to malnutrition was listed as a contributing factor to their deaths. People believed that something else happened that the autopsy didn't show, and theories started emerging. Some people believed the autopsy results to be true, that they succumbed to hypothermia after not being properly sheltered the night before. In severe cases of hypothermia, there may be hallucinations and paradoxical undressing, in which a person removes their clothing, which could explain why the hikers were found partially undressed. And Valentina could have survived by her decision to go to the forest, a difference in clothing, or her physical fitness. However, rescuers Valery Tatarnikov and Vladimir Zinov, who took part in the search operation for the bodies, claimed that it was impossible for the hikers to have died from the cold, and Zinov suggested that they might have died of altitude sickness. Some believe the hikers' deaths may have been caused due to drinking contaminated water or eating poisonous mushrooms for breakfast. Lake Baikal, which sits above the mountains, is a well-known toxic waste dumping ground. If the waste was washed downstream, the hikers might have drunk the toxins in their water, and some of the toxins might not have been visible in a standard toxicology report. Similar to another theory, which we'll get to in a second, it's possible the hikers became incapacitated, causing them to die from hypothermia before they died due to the toxin. However, a problem with this theory is that these deaths were an isolated incident. If a water source used by many tourists was so badly contaminated, only one group becoming affected doesn't make much sense. The poisonous mushroom theory is similar to this one as well. Korovina was a known forager who taught the art to her students. It's possible that one of the hikers found some mushrooms to add to their breakfast that ended up being poisonous. After eating their breakfast, the effects of the mushroom poisoning began as they were walking, causing them to hallucinate and be sick. A common hallucination caused by psilocybin is to see other people cry blood, and overdoses on psilocybin can cause psychosis, convulsions, cardiac arrest, and possibly send someone into a coma. Once again, it's likely that the hikers died as a result of hypothermia due to being in an altered state. Valentina could have survived by eating less mushroom or just being less affected, and was saved from the hypothermia by either wearing warmer clothes or running to the forest and sheltering out of paranoia. This theory is probably the least likely to have happened, but it's the theory that the hikers walked in on some sort of Russian military experiment in the mountains and were killed for what they saw, and their deaths were then covered up by the police and the medical examiner. The group had deviated from the usual route through the region, so it's possible that this change of plans led them to a group of experimenters that weren't prepared for visitors. But there are two problems with this theory, one being the location the hikers died in, and Valentina surviving. The Khamar-Daban mountains has a heavy traffic of tourists hiking at any given time, so a location with such high foot traffic wouldn't seem like the first pick for a secret military experiment. The location the hikers died in was an open area, so Valentina being able to escape from said experimenters would have been difficult, since there would be nowhere near to hide. This last theory appears to be the most widely supported, and it's the theory that the group died from chemical weaponry, specifically nerve agents. In particular, the frothing at the mouth and convulsing matches death by a strong nerve agent. The bruising of the lungs could also be a sign, as contact with nerve agents might cause distress to the lungs. Cardiac arrest is also caused by it, matching Korovina's cause of death. Novichok, a family of nerve agents developed by the Soviet Union and Russia up to 1993, were reportedly tested in areas near Khamar-Daban. Novichok is considered to be the deadliest nerve agent to exist, 10 times more deadly than VX, and 20 times more deadly than sarin. Other than Korovina, the cause of death of the other hikers could have still been hypothermia, even if they were exposed to a nerve toxin, since they could have been knocked unconscious or fallen into a coma, and then ultimately succumbing to exposure. This theory still raises questions, like, why didn't Valentina suffer the same fate as the rest? And where did the gas come from if no one else was there? But the rainstorm could have played a crucial part in this. The rain could have washed a strong nerve agent, like Novichok, that had been tested at most 4 or 5 months prior in a more discreet site nearby. As the morning sun evaporated water from the rainstorm, some of the still hazardous agent went with it. Alexander walked over a highly contaminated spot, causing almost instant symptoms. He may have absorbed the toxin through either his skin or by breathing it in. When Korovina ran to him, she was exposed to the same toxin. Tatiana, Victoria, and Timur were the first to reach Korovina, but quickly ran away, which could be why their deaths were delayed slightly. Since Valentina did not get close to Korovina, only Victoria, who had removed herself from the epicenter of contamination, Valentina was not exposed to high levels of the toxin. Dennis was also not impacted by high levels initially, but his decision to hide and crouch down was his downfall. Small levels of toxin were floating close to the ground, and he breathed them in. He was exposed to less than the other 5, which is why his death was more delayed, but it ultimately caught up to him. Russian police suspected that runoff from the test could be the cause of the deaths, and they waited to start their search in order to ensure that the agent had mostly evaporated before sending a recovery team. Just to name a few other theories, tourist Vladimir Brzenkov and member of the search operation Nikolai Fedorov suggested that the hikers went mad due to infrasounds, which are sound waves with a frequency below the lower limit of human audibility. Yuri Golius, the leader of the search operation, blamed their deaths on Korovina's negligence, claiming she was starving her students, which caused them to have vitamin deficiency. In a 2018 interview, Valentina denied this theory, and she herself believes the cause of the hikers' deaths was pulmonary edema, which is excessive fluid accumulation in the tissue or air spaces of the lungs. Although it may seem like there's a lot of support around these theories, there is no true answer as to what happened. Just like the Dyatlov case, the Khamar-Daban incident remains unsolved, and it may remain that way forever.